Bible Verse Daily. Learn one verse every day. Romans chapter 8 verse 28 is one of the most quoted verses in the Bible, and also one of the most frequently misapplied. People reach for it in moments of crisis, loss, and confusion, offering it as reassurance that everything will turn out fine in the end, and there is something true in that impulse. But the verse itself is doing something far more complex and far more honest than a simple guarantee of good outcomes. It is not saying that bad things won't happen to you. It is not saying that every painful experience has a neat resolution waiting around the corner. Paul had watched Christians suffer and die for their faith. He knew what the Roman Empire could do to people who believed what he believed. When he wrote these words, he was not writing from the perspective of someone whose life was going smoothly. He was writing from within a framework of eschatological hope, which is a way of saying he was holding a very long view of history, one that stretched beyond death itself. The verse is not comfort for avoiding suffering. It is comfort for enduring it, which is a much harder and much more honest thing to say. Romans chapter 8 is widely considered the theological summit of the entire letter, and possibly of all Paul's writing. To understand verse 28, you need to understand what Paul has been building for the previous 7 chapters. He has argued that all humans are under the power of sin, that the law cannot fix this problem, and that justification comes through faith in Christ rather than through keeping commandments. By chapter 8, he has arrived at the Spirit. He describes life in the flesh versus life in the Spirit, the groaning of creation waiting for redemption, the Spirit interceding for believers with wordless prayers. Verses 26 and 27 immediately before verse 28 describe the Spirit helping us in our weakness when we don't even know how to pray. Then Paul transitions to verse 28 with the word "and we know," indicating he is making a summary claim, a conclusion that follows from everything before it. The context is not a prosperity promise. It is embedded in a discussion of weakness, suffering, and groaning creation. The comfort Paul offers is located inside the very struggle he has been describing, not after it resolves. The Greek text of Romans chapter 8 verse 28 opens with the word Synergei, which is where we get the English word synergy. It means to work together, to cooperate toward an outcome, and it is the heart of the verse. The King James renders it as all things work together for good, which is accurate but can be misread to mean every individual thing that happens will turn out to be a good thing in isolation. That is not what Paul said. He said all things cooperate together toward good. The weaving image is useful here. Individual threads in a tapestry are not all beautiful on their own. Some are dark, some are frayed, some seem to go nowhere, but the craftsman works them together toward a finished image. The second crucial element is the audience. Paul qualifies this. To them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose. This is not a universal promise to all human beings regardless of their relationship with God. It is a specific statement about those who are inside the covenant relationship Paul has been describing. The good being worked toward is further defined in verses 29 and 30, where Paul describes conformity to the image of Christ, which is an eschatological good, not necessarily a comfortable or immediate one. Romans chapter 8 verse 28 sits at the center of one of Christianity's longest theological debates, primarily because of the phrase "according to his purpose," and what that implies about divine sovereignty and human freedom. In the Calvinist tradition, the called here refers specifically to the elect, those whom God has sovereignly chosen before the foundation of the world. The verse in this reading is about God's meticulous providence over every detail of the elect's life, steering even tragedy toward their ultimate glorification in verse 30. In the Arminian tradition, the called refers to all who respond in faith to God's general call, and the working of all things for good is conditional on that response, fitting with their emphasis on human freedom and cooperation with grace. The prosperity gospel movement has read this verse as a general promise of temporal blessing, an interpretation that most mainstream biblical scholars find unsupportable, given the context of suffering Paul has just described. Eastern Orthodox theology tends to read the good being worked toward as theosis, the process of becoming increasingly united with God's nature, which is a long arc that may include significant suffering along the way. All of these streams agree that God is not passive in the lives of those who love Him, even as they disagree about how exactly that providence operates. The practical weight of Romans chapter 8 verse 28 shifts significantly when you understand it correctly. It is not a promise that bad things will not happen to you. It is a promise that even the bad things are not operating outside God's awareness and engagement. That is a different kind of comfort, and in many ways a more honest one. When you are in the middle of something genuinely hard, a loss, a failure, a betrayal, a health crisis, the last thing you need is someone implying it will resolve neatly. What Paul is actually offering is something more durable, the assurance that no circumstance, however dark, has slipped beyond the reach of a God who is actively working all of it together. The question this asks of you is not whether you can maintain a positive attitude. The question is whether you trust that the one who called you has not abandoned you inside the hard thing. You do not need to pretend the painful thing is good. You do not need to paper over grief with spiritual language. Paul himself groans in this chapter. The promise is that groaning and purposeful navigation are not mutually exclusive. God is at work even in what you would never have chosen. Romans chapter 8 verse 28 is not a guarantee that your circumstances will be comfortable, or that every painful chapter has a tidy resolution. Paul is making a larger theological claim, that God works all things together, cooperating every thread, for a good that is ultimately defined as conformity to the image of Christ. The promise is specifically to those who love God and are called according to His purpose. What it offers in the middle of suffering is not an explanation, but a direction. The one who called you is still at work even now. If this verse study helped you go deeper, please like, comment, and subscribe to Bible Verse Daily for a new verse study every week. Hit the bell notification so you never miss one. New verse studies every week.